Welcome. It's really lovely to see you again. I'm wondering, are you ready for a story? I've got a great story for you. It's called The Great Family. Come, I wonder where you will sit. Have a seat. Cross your legs. And let's get ready for the story. Let's get our hearts ready. I am here. 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 So many important and interesting and amazing stories happened in the desert. So it's important that we all understand what a desert is like. I couldn't fit a whole desert in my lounge room, but I have a piece of the desert. Teddy. Oh, sorry, Chewy. There you are. The desert is always moving. It's hard to find your way. And if you get lost in the desert, you might never come out. There isn't much water in the desert. And if you can't find water, you could die of thirst. And not much grows in the desert. And if you can't find food, you could die. Oh, and it's cold in the desert at night, and yet in the daytime, the sun is so hot it blisters your skin. And when the wind blows, the sand stings it and your eyes. So people in the desert wear a lot of clothes to cover them, to protect them from the freezing cold at night, and the blistering heat in the day, and from the stinging sand. The desert is a dangerous place, and people don't go there unless they have to. Well, after the Great Flood, the animals stretched out and gathered into all four directions to have their babies and fill the earth again with life. They would often gather near rivers. And people, too, gathered near the water source. And they built their little villages. And then their great cities. And the greatest and most ancient city was the city of Ur. Now the people of Ur, they had unusual thoughts about God. They thought there were gods in everything. And gods in these stones and these trees and these clouds and in the sun and on the earth. And the place was full of gods. But there was one family that believed, well, they thought that all of God was everywhere. They didn't really know that, but that's kind of what they believed. Abram and Sarai, they were part of this family. And when the time came for them to move to a new place, they didn't know for sure whether God would be there. And they didn't know what the place would be like. But they gathered all of their animals and their helpers and their old people and the children of the family, and they all began to move to this new place, following the river to give them water and water for their animals and to show them the way. It was a very, very long way. And hard work. When you have all your old people and your children, you can't move very fast. After a long time, they came across some people coming from Haran, and they knew that it wasn't far now. And then they were there. And they, and their family, and their helpers, and their animals settled. Abram moved out to the edge of the city and looked over at the desert, the stars in the sky, and the desert sands. And there, God grew so close to Abram. And Abram grew so close to God that Abram knew what God wanted him to do. God wanted him and Sarai to move on to another place where God would make them into a family, a great family. And God blessed Abram and said he would be a blessing to many. So Abram and Sarai packed up their things and their helpers and their animals and left the rest of their family and began this great journey. Right across the desert. They didn't even know for sure where they were going, but he was trusting God. So they got to a place called Shechem. And when they finally got to this place, Abram again moved away on his own, and he climbed a hill. And there he prayed to God. He grew close to God, and God drew close to him, and he knew God was in this place too. And so he built a little altar to mark a place where he had met with God. And he and Sarai continued their journey. After quite some time, they came to another place near Bethel, and again he moved aside so that he could be on his own. And he drew close to God, and God grew close to him. And he knew God was not just in this place or that place, but all of God was everywhere. And so once again, Abram built an altar, a marker, to show that he'd met with God there too. And he and Sarai continued their journey on to Hebron, near the Oaks of Mamre. And that is where they settled. Every so often, Abram would go off on his own again to the edge of the desert, and he'd look out over the stars and the sand, and he would draw close to God. But this time, he drew so close to God, and God grew so close to him that he heard God's voice. And God said to Abram, "You and Sarai are going to have a baby, a child." Abram laughed. He said, "We're too old to have children." And God said to him, "Nonetheless, you will change your name. Your name will now become Abraham, father of many. And Sarai's name will be Sarah." Well, Abraham and Sarah, when he told her, laughed again. They were sitting near the tent when 3 visitors came to visit them. As was the custom, Sarah went and prepared bread and meat and milk and water for their guests. Abraham had invited them to come and sit in his tent in the shade. And there, the visitors said, "We have a message for you. This time next year, you will have a baby boy." Sarah, outside the tent, heard them and laughed again. But sure enough, a year later, Abraham and Sarah had a little boy. And they both laughed. In fact, they named their son Laughter. In their language, the word for laughter is Isaac. And they were so happy together. Isaac grew up, and Sarah, full of years, very, very old, she died, and they buried her near the Oaks of Mamre, in a cave. Abraham missed Sarah. He was so lonely. But he had one more thing he needed to do. So he sent his most trusted helper all the way back to the land of his people near Haran. And when the helper got near Haran, they stopped at a well for some water, and there was a lovely lady by the name of Rebecca. And Rebecca offered to get her some water for the helper and to draw water for his animals. The helper was struck by how full of courage she was, as well as kindness. Rebecca invited the helper to come back to her family and have a meal. And so, over the meal, the helper told Rebecca and her family about the great family, about Abraham and Sarah. Rebecca wanted to be part of that great family, and so she went with the helper all the way back through the desert, past Shechem, past Bethel, and when she was nearly at Hebron, Isaac came out to meet her. And Isaac and Rebecca were married. But Abraham, he was very old and full of years. And so Abraham died, and they buried him near the oaks of Mamre in the cave next to Sarah. And Isaac and Rebekah, they had a child. They had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, and this went on for thousands of years until your great-grandparents were born, and your grandparents, and your parents, and you became part of the great family, greater than the stars in the heavens and the grains of sand on the earth. Now I wonder what part of that story you like the best. I wonder if there's one part of the story that is more important than any others for you. And I wonder if there's any place in this story where you might see yourself. It's a little bit about like when you and then I wonder if there's any part of that story we could take away and still have all the story that we need. I invite you, in your time and in your space, to work with this story. You might do that at your learning desk where you're doing your schoolwork. Or you might do it in a place where you can do something creative. In mud, or with craft, or a poem, or song, a poster, where you can create something that says something to you about this story. Enjoy God's gift of this story to you, and God bless you.